Hey, kia ora, Helen Brahms here, coming to you with Genealogy and History for May 6th. Hope you're all having a super fantastic, sparkling day. We got some good stuff to talk about today. We're going from 1626 today through to 2004. Oh my goodness, it's going to be an awesome day. So, are we ready? Okay, here we go. In 1626, Dutch colonists, and remember, as we're going through, take note of names that we talk about and take note of events that we talk about and see who in your family tree, maybe that person, or maybe you had people in your tree who participated in that event in some way, whether they actually helped with construction on something, if they were actually involved in the event, or whether they witnessed the event. And it's when we do this and we put it all together, this is what makes history come alive for you and come alive for people as well. When you have that personal connection, and then you can then take it a step further later on, and then you can go and do, when all the travel and everything starts opening back up again, you could do trips that are in the footsteps of your ancestors and actually walk in these areas and see, or most of the time you can, walk in the areas or go experience the area that your ancestors came from, where the events happened, that they were involved with. So you get to be able to somehow experience that, and it makes it come even more alive and gives you more of a personal connection to a point in time in history. So, starting with 1626, are we ready? Let's go. All right. Dutch colonist Peter Minuet organizes the purchase of Manhattan Island from Native Americans for 60 guilders worth of goods. I'm not sure how much a guilder is, but it sounds like a lot, or maybe not. Believed to have been the Carnacy Indians of the Lenape. In 1835, James Gordon Bennett Sr. publishes the first issue of the New York Herald for 1 cent. It will cost you a cent to get a copy of that. U.S. blacksmith John Deere creates the first steel plow in Grand Detour, Illinois. This is the same John Deere that you see on tractors, that you see on all that agricultural equipment. In 1837 is when he started that, and you can see the big empire that it has become today. Back a few days ago, we actually talked about this particular postage stamp. In 1840, the world's first adhesive postage stamp, the penny black. We talked about that about 3 or 4 days ago. On this day in 1840, which is just a few days after it was released, it had its first use in Great Britain. In 1851, Dr. John Gorey patents a refrigeration machine. In 1851. I don't even think electricity was around in 1851. So I'm sort of I've got that on my list to go check to see how could he create a refrigeration machine, because I don't think we had electricity in 1851. Maybe we did. The same day, so Dr. John Gorey patents the refrigeration machine. That same day, Linus Yale patents the Yale lock. So we had 2 patents that were issued, that have had a major impact on society these days. And also on that same day, we got 3 major events that same day. The San Francisco Chamber of Commerce starts, and I don't know if that was the very first one in the U.S., but chambers of commerce are everywhere these days. In 1860, the San Francisco Olympic Club was the first U.S. athletic club to form. In 1889, this is really cool. I liked this one. In 1889, the Exposition Universal, the World's Fair in Paris, opens with the recently completed Eiffel Tower serving as the entrance arc into the exposition. Pretty cool, huh? In 1896, Samuel Pierpont Langley flies his unpiloted No. 5 aircraft using a catapult launch from a boat on the Potomac River in the U.S. The aircraft travels almost 3/4 of a mile, 10 times further than any previous heavier than air flying machine. So, they're starting to get to, 1896, they're doing more flying stuff. They're starting to figure out what the aerodynamics and all that sort of stuff. That's pretty cool. In 1904, the American Lung Association holds its first meeting. In 1906, temporary permit to erect overhead wires on Market Street, San Francisco, allows United Railroads to run electric streetcars. And we know all about those electric. I mean, you go to San Francisco, you can't really go anywhere without seeing an electric streetcar. Those things are awesome to ride on, especially when you're having to go up those steep hills and everything. Now, if you've seen my Facebook page today, there is a photograph of these 9 gentlemen all dressed up in uniforms with medals galore and sashes and all of that sort of thing. This photo is very important for a reason. So on this day, George V becomes King of the United Kingdom upon his death of Edward VII. So Edward VII died on this day in 1910, and he'd only been a king for 9 years. His funeral was notable for the enormous assemblage of foreign royalty. There are 9 kings in that photograph, 9 kings. And the kings were King Haakon VII of Norway, Tsar Ferdinand of the Bulgarians, King Manuel II of Portugal, and the Algarves. I've probably screwed up that name. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany and King of Prussia, King George I of the Hellenes, and King Albert I of the Belgians. And then seated in the, so that's going across the back row, seated in the front is King Alfonso VIII of Spain, King George V of the United Kingdom, and King Frederick VIII of Denmark. And so that photo was notable because of all the royalty that attended the funeral a few days after Henry VII passed away. But there is another reason that photo became famous, a very historical picture, not only because there were 9 kings together in that photograph, but they said in a mere 4 years after the picture was taken, it would let me go back. But it said it would be the last great gathering of royals before the outbreak of World War I. So less than 4 years later, we're into World War I, where many of the nations represented in that photograph would be at war with each other. So that was the last time you had that many royals in one place during peace times before World War I broke out and many of those nations were battling each other. In 1914, the British House of Lords rejects women's suffrage. This is huge around this time because it was in 1893, I think it was, that women's suffrage in New Zealand actually allowed the women the right to vote. And we were the first country in the world to do that. Yet here we are, 20 years later, and the British House of Lords is rejecting women's suffrage. In 1929, the New York to San Francisco foot race begins. Yes, you heard right. New York to San Francisco foot race. It lasted for 78 days, and the grand climax of the 1929 International Transcontinental Foot Race, the so-called Bunion Derby, was decided when Johnny Salo finally beat Peter Galvuzzi, and they were like running neck and neck through the whole thing, by 2 minutes and 45 seconds. And that was they said it's a micro margin when Salo's overall time was 525 hours, 56 minutes, and 10 seconds. I'm sort of like 78 days running across. But then that kind of reminded me of the book called Flanagan's Run. And I can't remember the name of the author, but it is of a foot race, transcontinental foot race, that begins in LA and ends in New York. And it was a very good fictional story about ultimate running and everything else. And didn't realize that it had actually been based on real events. And this race was New York to Los Angeles. So 525 hours, 56 minutes, and 10 seconds over 78 days. I mean, that just blows my mind. On this day in 1935, remember in 1910, on this day in 1910, King Edward VII passed away, which made King George V brought him to the throne. So on this day in 1935, King George V and Queen Mary celebrated the Silver Jubilee of him becoming king. In 1937, the German airship the Hindenburg explodes in flames at Lakehurst, New Jersey, killing 35 of the 97 people on board and 1 on the ground. I remember seeing that in movies, hearing about it. It was, there was a lot of blaming of, because it was German with the American, there was a lot of backwards and forwards as to who was responsible for it, and I don't think they ever figured that out. But I always remember hearing the stories about it as I was growing up. Even though we had absolutely nothing to do with it back in New Zealand, we still heard the stories about it. In 1940, the Pulitzer Prize was awarded to John Steinbeck for The Grapes of Wrath. Wrath, however you want to say that. In 1941, at California's March Field, Bob Hope performs his first USO show. He went on to do many, many USO shows over the years. I mean, he passed away when he was 100 and in 2003. And so he was famous for his USO shows, for traveling around supporting the military and everything else. His very first one was held on this day in 1941. In 1954, the English athlete Roger Bannister becomes the first to run a sub-4-minute mile, recording 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds at the Iffley Road track in Oxford, England. They actually did a movie. There was a movie done about that one. I have to go back and find the name of it because I remember watching a movie about it. It was a fictional movie, but it was based on that. Now, yesterday we talked about I Love Lucy's Vita Vegemin, yes, episode being broadcast for the first time yesterday in 1952, if I remember correctly. And on this day in 1957 was the last broadcast of the I Love Lucy on CBS TV. In 1957, same day, Pulitzer Prize was awarded to John F. Kennedy for Profiles in Courage. On this day in 1960, U.S. President Eisenhower signs the Civil Rights Act of 1960, a very important thing. In 1966, the Rolling Stones released, and I've had this song going through my head the entire day now. The Rolling Stones release Painted Black in the U.S. In 1970, I had to go find out. Now, this next person, I had to go find out more information on because I was sort of like, "You really did that?" And I was sort of like, "Yeah, I'm not so sure I would do that." In 1970, Yuichiro Miura of Japan skis down Mount Everest. I kid you not. It's all out there. He became the first person to ski on Mount Everest on May 6, 1970. He descended nearly 42,000 vertical feet from South Col, an elevation of over 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet. This feat was documented in a 1975 film called The Man Who Skied Down Everest. The film won the Academy Award for the Best Documentary, the first sports film to do so. In 2003, at the age of 70, he became the oldest person to reach the summit of Mount Everest. This record was later broken by himself. And we'll talk about that in a second. He had 2 heart surgeries for cardiac arrhythmia in 2006 and 2007. And on May 23, 2013, he again became the oldest person to climb the summit of Mount Everest at the age of 80. They actually had to airlift him from the peak base camp because he couldn't walk all the way down. So there's some people out there who think he shouldn't be awarded that because he didn't finish. According to some things that I have read about this, to finish a climb, you have to actually finish the descent as well. But hey, it's out there now. So in 1986, Donald E. Pelosi becomes the first Native American bishop. Let's see, in 1994, and we've talked about this one before, and I'm super excited to bring it back again. On this day in 1994, the Channel Tunnel linking England and France officially opens. It was officially opened on this day nearly 200 years after the idea was first suggested. There were many misgivings, the sea having protected for centuries what Shakespeare described as this precious stone set in the silver sea, this fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war. It took 6 years to build at a cost of $4.65 billion to 12 billion pounds, which is around $17 billion in today's money. There is no facility for vehicles to be driven through. Everything and everybody goes by train. Up to 400 of them pass through the tunnel each day. carrying an average of 50,000 passengers, 6,000 cars, 180 coaches, and 54,000 tons of freight on the 35-minute journey. That's a lot of stuff. And it is a far cry from the proposals of 1802, where the French engineer Albert Mathieu, the first person to suggest the tunnel between the two countries. His plan included an artificial island halfway across so the horses pulling the wagons through could be changed. So they were talking about doing... Later, the proposals for the tunnel came from Napoleon III in 1856, and the English Prime Ministers William Gladstone in 1865 and David Lloyd George in 1919. And this is when we were talking about the other day about the length of the dream. It doesn't matter what the dream is, as long as the passion is there and people want to pursue it. Remember, this first idea was launched in 1802, and it didn't become a reality until 1994. That is a long time for a dream to be realized, but it was. On this day in 1994, Nelson Mandela and the ANC finally confirmed as the winners of South Africa's first post-apartheid election. And the election went over 2 or 3 days, I think it was, to make sure everybody got a chance to vote. On this day in 1997, Michael Jackson and the Bee Gees were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In 2002, entrepreneur Elon Musk founds SpaceX. We've all heard about those over the years and everything else. And our last entry for today, and this, I didn't even realize it was this long ago. I was sort of like, this really happened in 2004? Because I remember watching this a lot. I didn't realize it was that long. I mean, that's 17 years ago. So on this day in 2004, the TV sitcom Friends airs season finale in the 10th and final season in the US, and they had 52.5 million viewers. Like I said, I didn't realize it was that long ago. I thought it was more recent than that. So thinking back over today's events, the people that were mentioned, are any of the people in your family tree? Are any of the events that occurred, were any of your anybody in your family tree at those events participating or witnessing the events? Did any of your did you have anybody in your family tree working on the channel tunnel between England and France? There's lots of different things that have occurred over time, and it's interesting to go back and find the stories. And if you want some help finding the truth behind the rumors and the stories and the secrets in your family, or if you just need assistance getting started, need a place to start, please go to helenconnects.com, that is mentioned in the description here, and set up a time for us to be able to have a conversation, and it's a free consultation. And that's it from us today for May 6th. We'll be back tomorrow, May 7th, for another episode of Genealogy and History. Hei konera.